It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here are your co-hosts, Doug Maurice and Shehan Jeharaja. And we're back in Conference Championship Week. It's Doug and Shehan. And Shehan, it is simultaneously boring and complicated here in Conference Championship Week. I don't think this is what it's supposed to be. I think this is, in many ways, the worst. I didn't research this. Is this the worst Conference Championship Week of the playoff era? Because it's the matchups themselves, but then it's also what the College Football Playoff Selection Committee did on Tuesday night and how they explained it / didn't explain it, which has created a world, I think, to a lot of people where why are we playing these things if all they can do is hurt the teams that are playing in them? Over time, I think we've talked about it on the show. It's like, why we have this show. I have evolved from college football playoff discussions, trying to get inside the mind of the committee is interesting, to it's one of my least favorite things to do in the world, because there are 13 people trying to express a singular vision, and it's not a singular vision. And I do think sometimes they evaluate the football, but I think their nuanced, linear thinking of we're doing this because of this, which would lead us to this, doesn't exist. And so how far are we in? We've been doing, what are we, like 80 seconds in? 75 seconds in? I have a knot in my stomach. How is this our sport? How is this? This is our sport? It's like I'm trying to figure out, I don't know, Purdue, I don't know, Michigan, could they do it? Kansas State, I don't know, TCU. And instead it's like, wow, those 13 people, they sure don't think in a straight line. Let's start overview before we dig in on the committee. Do you have a knot in your stomach? Or are you okay?
I'm good. I listen, I mention it all the time. I was brought up by the 2014 decision by the playoff committee. So I died that day. So I don't feel anything anymore.
Okay. That makes me a little bit sad. I don't know. Are you, this is like zombie Shehan. We never knew young. How old were you in 2014? 19?
I was 20.
You were 20 and the world shattered. Changed forever in front of your eyes. So the thing I do think, but there's a difference here, and I do have the research on this. The number of teams, when you look at the top 4 teams in the penultimate, which again, the only good thing about this week is a reason to frequently use the word penultimate, which is one of the 5 best words in the English language.
Great word.
Because the idea that it even exists, it's like, what do you call something when it's the end or the last? Like it's the end, it's the last thing of the. What if we had a word for the next to last thing? How many syllables should it have, and how much should it sound like a thing that a princess would say? Woo! If you do the Queen's voice, what word would you come up with for next to? It's the next to last ratings. Oh, that doesn't sound right. Penultimate. Oh, that sounds right. What? I don't even know what it is. What is? I don't. So we get to say penultimate 400 times. Do you know the origins of the word penultimate, by the way? Did you Google that while I was talking?
I did not. I should have done that. I feel like ultimate means final, right? Like I feel like that's the origin. But then what does pen mean? I don't understand how that means next to ultimate.
Yeah, know? Next to ooh, it's the penultimate ratings for the Queen. So that's where we are. So I do think the thing that is different about this, and there is one circumstance in the college football playoff first 8 years, there is one that applies here. There is one. But even within that one, I don't think it applies. So I don't really think we've ever been where we are. And the thing that has me all, I don't even want to say riled up, sick to my stomach. I was trying to think of the Queen's word for that. Ooh, how do you feel, Doug?
I'm feeling quite ill. By the way, I did get it. It's from the Latin. So ultimus means last. So that tracks. And then paine means almost. So Pine Ultimus, penultimate, almost last. So I guess they thought it was very important to conflate those two things together into one very important word.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be good if remember that movie about the kid on the bus with the rock band? And if it was Pinal Famous, right? If it would have been that, like that would have been better. Oh, have you seen the Cameron Crowe vehicle? Pine Ultimate Famous. So the thing is, in 2014, when your world shattered and you were never the same and you became Zombie Shehan, a team, and we'll get to the thing that applies. This is not the one that applies, but we're trying to, the thing we're trying to explain is USC is number 4, Ohio State is number 5. USC is playing, Ohio State is not. USC has the opportunity to lose, Ohio State does not, and the committee left the door open for USC losing for them to not get in the playoff while a team that's home gets in. And that is the thing that a lot of people have an issue with. So let's lay the foundation first. To me, going in, linear thinking, logical thinking, the thing on Tuesday night would have been if USC is ahead of Ohio State, they're in. Barring the kind of blowout loss, barring the 59-0 Ohio State-Wisconsin game in 2014 that shakes you to your core and charges you to change it, forces you to reevaluate everything. This team is not who we thought they were. So if you have a 59-0, USC is not who we thought they were. We're sorry that you had one more opportunity to show us that, but this absolutely is a game changer. We cannot ignore it. This is everything else to us has been fraudulent now. This is who you are. Oh my God. I left the room open for that. But otherwise, to me, if USC is ahead on this Tuesday, which they are, USC is 4, Ohio State is 5, then Ohio State is behind USC because they can't do anything to get past them. And to me, then USC wouldn't be able to do anything to fall out because they're playing a game. They earned the right to play a game that Ohio State doesn't play. So that was my linear thinking. The thing that I left the door open for was I thought it was very possible. I think you could make a case that Ohio State should be ahead of USC right now. And I think when you compare the Penn State win and the Notre Dame win versus the UCLA win and the Oregon State win and the Notre Dame win and margin of victory and game control and strength of record and all those kind of things, I absolutely think you could have Ohio State ahead of USC, which is why I thought Ohio State could still make the playoff. But I said, wait till Tuesday night. Because then to me, if you think Ohio State's better, then USC can win its way in. It's like, oh, USC's 5, but once they're a champ, they'll be 4. And that's it. But the idea that you have USC ahead now and they can lose their way out, which Boo Corrigan said, right, Shehan? That's the thing that doesn't make sense to me. And I know that you and some other people had adopted an even more stringent sort of, even before the announcement on Tuesday night, you kind of thought the playoff should have been set. It's Georgia, Michigan, TCU, USC, no matter what, because again, those are 4 teams playing this weekend. Ohio State's not playing, and that's it. So I'm confused because I think there was a real opportunity to just put Ohio State 4 and then you get exactly what you want here, which is win your way in. Oh gosh, I can feel it. Why do I feel this way about college football? Oh my God, help me. I can't. Why is this sport like this? Okay, because here's the thing. I think winning your way in is great. I think losing your way out is ridiculous. And they had the opportunity to make it the one, and instead they have absolutely left the door open on the other, and I don't know why. Okay, you go now. Oh my God. Why am I'm sorry. I shouldn't be like this. What's it feel like to be dead inside about college football? Is it better? You've been dead inside about this sport for 8 years. Is it better?
About this one particular thing, about the playoff committee.
Not about the Saturdays, but about the Tuesdays and the Sunday afternoon at the end. You're dead about the logic and the decision making and the people in a room. You're not dead about the 3.5 hours where young men go head to head in a battle of wills with a oblong ball. No, that you feel good about. No. You're dead about meetings. What about meetings at work? Are you dead inside at meetings at work? Are you just like nothing means anything? There's no logic in the universe.
Is anybody not dead inside about meetings at work? Does anybody like go into them being like, I'm filled with life now that I get to do a meeting at work?
So I will say there was a time in my life where I mostly just wrote. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'd like to be in meetings more, because in meetings, you're there talking about doing stuff, but you're not doing anything, but you're getting paid. So it's like you're just talking about working, but you're not really working. And then I got in a situation where in my life now, I am in more meetings. And here's what I figured out. You do have more meetings, but then when the meeting's over, you still have all the work to do. You don't really get credit for being like, well, no, that was part of the work, though, where I talked about working. That was part of my 60-hour work week. It's like, no, you still have all the other things. So the meetings in the end are less exciting than I thought they would be.
Yeah, they're additions. They're additions. They're not.
Yes, they are additions. What would be the Queen's word for a thing that replaces something as opposed to being an addition? I thought it was a penal place. I'm going to start saying, ooh, sorry about that. I'm out of control. Really, zombie is better. So you're just dead to meetings, but you love football. But this is the part where we're doing an hour show about football meetings. Congratulations to us.
No, so here's my thought, right? I feel like this is maybe the first time in the playoff era. Again, I didn't go back and look, where it feels like Championship Saturday could result in, like you said, somebody losing their way out. And that just feels like such a letdown. Now, I will say, I think all four of the favorites are going to win this weekend. Lincoln Riley tends to be really good in rematch situations. He demolished every team basically that he's played in a conference championship game, and he's always done the rematch perspective. So I'm not incredibly worried about USC, and also they should have won the first game against Utah. It's not like they can't hang with Utah. So I do think this is ultimately going to be a non-issue, but the idea that in their head they're like, well, once you get to 2 losses, we have to treat you differently and we got to push you out. And it's just, like you said, it is a fake way to try to create objectivity. And that's why for me, I mean, right, like to just take a big picture, that's why I want expansion. I want there to be true objectivity. I want to be a conference championship was won, and we have to treat those teams a certain way, and we have to treat other teams a different kind of way, and we have to try to keep that logic intact over the course of, several months. And I just think that that's the way to do it, right? I think that this isn't something that's going to have an impact on the playoff race, right? But Alabama being ahead of Tennessee when they are both 10-2 with a head-to-head, and Tennessee has wins over LSU, who's number 15, and Alabama, who's number 6, and Alabama has a 1-point win over Texas, and that's it for their top 20 wins. But like, the committee's just like, well, we think they're better for reasons because Tennessee lost a game big, and that eliminates everything they did the rest of their season. I don't like that level of subjectivity because it always seems to favor the same types of people, right? Like it's the same sort of thing here. If it was the opposite, if Ohio State was playing in a conference championship game and TCU was number 5 right now, there's no way that Ohio State would get kicked out for losing and TCU would be able to back their way in, right? It's confirmation bias, and I don't know. It just, that's what frustrates me about this whole process, is how transparent this whole situation is. Now, the one thing is, the team involved is USC. Like they're a brand, obviously. I think that the committee, even in a loss, I think would like to keep USC in the field. It's an opportunity for the Pac-12 to be in. So I do think that changes the perspective a little bit, but we shouldn't be at a place where there's this level of subjectivity to where, again, a team that got blasted off the field in its last game, it just maybe gets in anyway because they didn't lose other games, because they didn't really play many other good other games to lose, like what's the point of that? And especially when you're looking at USC, and again, they lost a game by 1 point. Like that's just like the most damning thing, because it's got like that number by their record, but for other teams, it just doesn't work that same way. Right. So that's my frustration, is just the obvious way that teams are treated differently. And by the way, Boo Corrigan doesn't have a good answer for why this is the case, because there isn't a good answer, and he might not even agree with it, because like you said, it's 13 people trying to have one vision, but that in some ways makes it even worse.
I think they're not terrible on the football, right? But I do think they're terrible sometimes on the logic. And I do think that again, like what question are you trying to answer? The one thing I do think, and it kind of goes to something you just mentioned about Ohio State that Boo Corrigan did address. He said about the fact that Ohio State lost its last game, right? That so Ohio State is an 11-1 team whose only loss is to the number 2 team in the country, and they also have a win over number 8 and a win over a team in the 20s, right? Those are the facts. When did they lose the game? Well, what if they lost the game in week 1? What if they lost the game in week 7? What if they lost the game in the last weekend of the year? How much should that matter, right? He did say the recency bias is something we do talk about on a regular basis to make sure as we're going through this that we're looking at everything and looking at the full body of work. It was talked about in the committee room that going into really early in the fourth quarter, the game was still close, right? That Ohio State-Michigan game. Michigan put it away at the end, but with 7 minutes left, it was an 8-point game. It was a 1-score game. That being said, you can't completely dismiss the way the fourth quarter ended with Michigan kind of taking over the game late there. There's a lot of respect for Ohio State in the room and the wins they've had this year. So again, taking the full body of work, it was certainly something we looked at, but it wasn't, it's a blowout, let's move on. So I do think you get 2 bits of information there. One is they don't view it as a blowout, which I think that game is open to interpretation, right? There's the scoreboard, there's when it happened, there's game control. Certainly it was right there at halftime. It felt like Michigan was starting to like take control in the second half, even when they hadn't done so on the scoreboard yet. But I do think that explanation, I do think reflects the discussion in the room. And I do think that was good for Ohio State. I think you can just look at that and say, okay, they're not hammering Ohio State as much as maybe they could for that loss and the way it went. And then the recency bias thing, Shehan, I do respect the idea of, because this was always a battle in the poll age where the dumb poll voters were like, well, you lost last week, we got to drop you. And it's like, well, but like, why would you drop them behind maybe a team that they beat head to head 5 weeks ago, or that they have just because it was more recent? I do think recency bias in the polls was awful because, again, poll voters are idiots. But I also do think like trends matter some. How do you think it should be viewed? Would you view it substantially differently if Ohio State lost to Michigan in week 1 as opposed to the last week of the season or the middle of the season? Do you think it should be viewed differently, or is it absolutely body of work, and like kind of when it happened, as long as there's not a devastating injury that completely changes the trajectory or evaluation of a team, it doesn't really matter when the loss happened?
Well, I think that you should always take into account the context of when a loss happens. And one of the things, when I did the mock playoff committee with Boo Corrigan, ironically there, he kind of repeated a lot. We want to pick the 4 best teams in America. And the one thing that I'll say is that if in your last game you get, I mean, look, I understand why they say, oh, well, contextually, maybe it wasn't a blowout. Like it was kind of a blowout, right? Like on the scoreboard, it was kind of a blowout. And so I think that for me, if you get close to blown out in your final game of the year, that says where you are right now in this moment, right? And I don't think it should eliminate everything else, right? That's my frustration with the Tennessee thing, is that Tennessee, they were down by 18 points and then their quarterback tears their ACL, and then it's like a true like everything's over explosion blowout. But like, that shouldn't eliminate everything else that happened. My question is just, is what happened the rest of the year all that, as impressive to kind of hold up against somebody like USC, against somebody like TCU? Because remember, Maryland also had the ball. Well, if we want to talk about, well, Michigan scored some points late to make the game look a little bit bigger than it was. I watched that Maryland game too, right? And Maryland had the ball with the chance to go win the game, and Maryland's not a great team. And so, we can play this game both ways, but it only seems to ever be played one direction. That's the frustration.
Oh, that made me feel better because I do like One Direction. See, now that made me feel you dropped that in there. Did you do that for me?
I did not, but that's quite the callback to a while ago. Talking
about the Queen, I covered the Olympics one time in 2012 in London.
I was actually there. No way.
You went to those Olympics too?
I have a lot of family in London, and that was the year I graduated high school. And so my parents actually sent me on like basically a senior trip to go visit my family in London. So I got to do a couple of events there. Yeah.
Wow. Maybe we saw each other there.
Yeah. You were the white guy in England.
And that was I would have liked to know you then, because that was pre-zombie Shehan, when you were full of life and you believed anything was possible. But One Direction was just getting popular then. And they had this, they sang in the opening ceremonies. And they were like kind of in the pickup truck driving around the track. And they kind of, where my seat was, I was kind of by like one of the exits and where the tunnels kind of was. And like their pickup truck kind of went by me. And I was like, look how close I am to One Direction. And then I saw them 3 more times in my life. So anyway, that makes me feel better about thinking about England, not just Queen stuff. So I do think that it is difficult. I do think, USC certainly had times, if you're talking about game control and that kind of thing and close games. I mean, like, it's one of those things. The UCLA game was back and forth, right? That could have gone either way in the second to last weekend of the regular season. Now, UCLA is better than Maryland, certainly, but it all, like, the game control aspect does matter. USC kind of had its close games against lesser competition earlier in the year, right? And Ohio State kind of had it, had the Maryland thing at the end of the year. So I do think it's it is difficult to evaluate, but the thing that I'm having the trouble with is, like, whatever you think, I almost am fine whether they think Ohio State's better or USC's better. But, like, whatever you think, then keep thinking it, right? That's the thing that I like. What is making you change your perspective? And the thing that is making you change your perspective is a loss by one of the teams in a game the other team doesn't have to play. That's where my real problem is. We're going to look at the history of that aspect of this, and then we'll talk about conference championship games, what we think is going to happen in these games. We'll do it next on the College Football Survivor Show.
Don't miss the College Football Survivor Show bonus episode this week. Available only on Apple Podcasts.
I actually thought there's more upside with less baggage to Lane Kiffin, because I do think there's a cap on Hugh Freeze. I don't know that we've seen the best of Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin's like a child star. He's like Corey Feldman, right? It's like we've seen him grow up as a coach in front of our eyes the whole time. And then it's like he kind of fell off the scene, and then he was like had this guest arc on an ABC sitcom for like 6 episodes. And you're like, I don't know, is this guy a pretty good actor now? He was in like got a supporting role in an indie film and got a surprise Oscar nomination. And so then it's like, I don't know, should we hire him to be in a Marvel movie now? And some people are like, it's Lane Kiffin. Remember when he was that obnoxious guy in the baseball movie when he was 13? It's like, yeah, I don't know, but isn't he kind of a good actor? I feel like that's where we are with Lane Kiffin. And then he had like a goofy week on Twitter. I think he's like a better football hire for Auburn than Hugh Freeze is. So I don't know what's going to be next with Lane Kiffin, but I hope he's in a movie.
I love that the first child star you thought of was Corey Feldman.
Corey Feldman's like 65 now. I know. I'm sorry.
He's 51. I had to be reminded who Corey Feldman was because this might be a shocker. I do not remember him as a child star since I was born in 1994.
Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts for exclusive College Survivor Show bonus episodes.
With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at Marines.com.
Doug and Shehan back. So listen, in the history of the playoff, right? There have been, and I did the math, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So there's 8 times 4, 32. So there's been 32 playoff teams so far. Is that right? And there have been 6 teams in the 32 spots who were in the top 4 in the penultimate rankings and did not make the playoff. Okay, so we're laying that down. So let me give you the 5 instances that do not apply here to that situation. Okay, year 1, 3 of the top 4 in the penultimate make it in the final. The one that doesn't is TCU is 3rd and falls out. Ohio State is 5th and moves up.
So to be clear, in the penultimate rankings, TCU ranked number 3, Ohio State ranked number 5, breathing down their necks, and somehow TCU got left out. Wow, that's crazy. I'm sure that will never happen again in any sort of situation.
Yeah, I know. That was said like a zombie. My God. Don't eat my brains. Please don't eat my brains. I'm glad we're not in the same room right now. When you if we ever had like a promo, it'd be like The Walking Dead. It'd be like you, like young Shehan, kind of sitting around. Oh, Big 12's going to make the playoff. I'm so excited, everybody. And then like the Sunday comes and it's like your face gets ashen and you start moaning and walking around like you're sleepwalking. And then it's the new Shehan. So, but the instance there, but again, the reason that that's not like this, and we'll talk about that in a second, because there is a slight TCU conversation, even though I think there shouldn't be there. The difference there is Ohio State won its way in with a devastatingly convincing, and I think they may have needed not just to win, but to win in dominating fashion, win over Wisconsin, the Big Ten championship game. So as much as you turned into a zombie, at least somebody won their way in, and TCU was hurt by sitting at home. Well, no, they did play that weekend, didn't they?
They beat Iowa State 55-3.
So the Big 12 had jerry-rigged its schedule that they were playing on conference championship weekend, but it wasn't a conference championship game. But Ohio State wound up playing one more game. So Ohio State was 12-1, TCU was 11-1. Ohio State had a conference title, TCU shared it.
The famous call to Madison from Rosemont where they said, "Hey guys, we'll get you back later, but you got to throw this game. You got to throw it in a big way, historic way." Yeah. People remember, right?
You've been hurt, really. I hope you can find happiness in life. You've been hurt. So 2015, right? Iowa is number 4, and they do not make the college football playoff. But it's because the Big Ten championship game is a play-in game. It's 4 versus 5. It's 12-0 Iowa versus 11-1 Michigan State, and 11-1 Michigan State wins. That's like the playoff at its best. It was a quarterfinal in a conference title game. So that doesn't apply here. That's the second time.
Michigan State versus Iowa in a playoff play-in game. That is crazy. That feels like a million years ago.
Yeah. Again, it was like the Big Ten version of LSU Alabama, right? When it was like, LSU Alabama play a 9-7 game and everybody's like, look at this great defense. And then Iowa and Michigan State play a game like that. Everybody's like, oh my God, this conference. 2016, everybody made it. Top 4 were the top 4. 2017, 2 of the 4 in the next to last rankings made the final rankings. The 2 teams that did not, Auburn was 10-2 and was number 2 in the next to last rankings. Auburn, number 2, lost to number 6 Georgia in the SEC championship game. And Auburn, as a 3-loss team, fell from number 2 to out. And Georgia, as a 1-loss team, went from number 6 to number 3. So that SEC championship game was a play-in game as 2 versus 6. And then like the team that lost took a 3rd loss. So it's like, okay, well, like that you understood, right? So that's number 2. Hey, you earned the right to play in a conference championship game. But I do think people are sort of like, man, this 2-loss team, right? They had beaten Bama, right? And kind of like that wasn't kick 6, but like in a game that was like that's what propelled Auburn to be a 2-loss team that was number 2. So that was one of them. And then the other time in 2017 is the only one here that's applicable, and I'm going to save it. 2018, 3 of the teams in the final next to last rankings made it. Georgia was number 4 at 11-1, played undefeated Alabama in the SEC championship game and lost, took a 2nd loss. Oklahoma won the Big 12 championship, moved from number 6 to number 4. So Georgia, you could say, hey, man, you were in and you earned the right to be there and you lost, but they also got passed by a team that on the field won a conference championship game. So that's kind of what conference championship weekend is all about. That is very different than this scenario. 2019, again, it's Georgia. 3 of the 4 made it. Georgia is number 4. Georgia plays LSU in the SEC championship game. Georgia loses. It's the exact same scenario as the year before. Oklahoma is behind Georgia. Georgia loses its conference championship game. Oklahoma wins its conference championship game. Georgia falls out. Oklahoma goes in. Again, Georgia playing the extra game, but Georgia sitting at home with 1 loss, not losing that game, would have been passed by Oklahoma winning a conference championship and being a similar 1-loss team, but one has a crown and one doesn't. So losing the game did knock Georgia out, right? If they would have won, they would have been in, but they wouldn't have been in if they had been sitting at home, right? So again, that's not what this is. And then 2020 and 2021, the last 2 years, the top 4 made it. So those are the 5 circumstances, Shehan. Do we agree with those 5 circumstances where a team that was in the Final 4 and the next to last rankings did not make it, were all teams winning to get past them? And as much as 2014 hollowed you out and made you a different person, Ohio State did win its way in. And I think that's a fair way to evaluate that, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Does that feel like does that feel right? Like there are all those things are like, hey, Georgia's got to play a tough game. Oklahoma's playing a game. One wins, one loses. Like that's what conference championship weekend should be about, isn't it?
I think so. No, and I mean, these should be meaningful games. You know, one of my things, and again, going back to the 12-team playoff, probably my favorite thing about it is it brings more importance to conference championship games. Because I'll tell you what, it's great to compete at the national level and all that, right? But what you should be focused on more than anything else is winning your conference. If you don't win your conference, it should penalize you, right? Like it should matter that you don't win your conference. And so, you know, I certainly have no problem with the idea of somebody losing a close conference championship game while another person wins and getting that advantage and fighting their way in.
So let's go to the one circumstance that is possibly comparable here. It is 2017. And Wisconsin is undefeated 12-0, number 4. They're undefeated, but they're only number 4. They're the only undefeated team in the country, but they're only number 4. So you can tell the committee's a little uncertain on them already. They go to the Big Ten championship game to play number 7 Ohio State. And Ohio State is 10-2 in 2017 with a loss to Oklahoma and a loss to Iowa. And then Alabama is sitting there at number 5. Alabama lost to Auburn in the last game of the regular season and fell from number 1 to number 5. Okay. So like that's how this happens. So Alabama is sitting at home. They're a non-champ and they're sitting at home. And Wisconsin goes and plays a very competitive game with Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. But Ohio State wins, I think, 27-21. And so what you wind up with is a Big Ten 2-loss champ and a Big Ten runner-up with 1 loss. And the committee then has to choose who is the 4th spot. Is it the 2-loss Big Ten champ? Is it the 1-loss Big Ten non-champ? Or is it the team that sat at home? And they picked the team that sat at home. And I do remember being in the room in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center at Ohio State, thinking like they had the media come in and sit in the team room. We weren't in there with the team, but you're watching it. And I think that I was watching it thinking Ohio State was going to make it. And it came up on the screen and Ohio State did not make it. So that was a 2-loss conference champ that did not make it. And a 1-loss non-champ made it instead. So... And Wisconsin, but that's not even really the discussion point because that was like Ohio State, which was with 2 losses was they were number 8 going in. They were trying to win their way in with 2 losses, and they couldn't move up 3 spots to get past Bama, right? That no matter what they did, they couldn't get past it. And I do think, Shehan, the committee had real questions about Wisconsin that year. Wisconsin, just looking at their schedule that year, maybe these might be AP rankings, but their only ranked wins were over number 20 Iowa and number 24 Michigan. And they were just like number 4 was their peak, right? And so there are real questions there. But the bottom line is the comparison here is Wisconsin to Alabama. And in this situation, Wisconsin is USC and Alabama is Ohio State. And it is a blue blood sitting at home with 1 loss, not in the conference championship game. And it is another team out in the world on the biggest stage, losing their way out of the playoff. I think it's comparable, but it's certainly not exactly the same as what is happening here. How would you describe how comparable 2017 Wisconsin, Alabama is to 2022 USC, Ohio State?
Well, I will say, too, I think that when you look at this situation, I think that there's also a comparison to Auburn in some ways, because Auburn was number 2 in the country at 10-2. It wasn't a surprise to anybody that they had 2 losses. One of those losses was to Clemson. But I think that if you say that Auburn is 3 spots ahead of Alabama heading into conference championship weekend, and then they lose a game to a team that you think is a college football playoff team, how has that changed your calculus of whether Auburn deserves to be ahead of Alabama, a team they just beat by double figures? You know, like that seems like a silly situation to me. And so
It is Auburn's third loss, which I do think is just so that year. Now,
but then why put them at number 2 if they have 2 losses, though?
No, I know, but I don't want to get bogged down too much in a thing that is, because that's a very clear thing that's different here. We've never had a 2-loss team make the playoff, and now, like that year, there were 4 1-loss teams that made the playoff, and then we're going to say like, well, how come the 3-loss non-champ didn't make it? That's just a different conversation. And yes, head-to-head matters, but when Alabama and Auburn head-to-head, even if you count it as like half a loss or not really a loss, I mean, I understand what you're saying. The idea of you lost your way out by getting to play in an extra game. That is a comparison here. But I do think when that extra game gives you like a third loss and everybody else has 1, it is different than this situation.
I think that my qualm is then Auburn should have never been number 2, right? Like Auburn should have been number 4 or something like that. Linear
thinking of like you were because they got so much credit for beating Alabama. And then as soon as they lost a game, they earned the right to play in by beating Alabama. Then you're like, the heck with them. Right. And they dropped way down. So I understand that. But again, 3 losses here versus all 1-loss teams is not what this is. Right. So I do think you can be mad. I get it. The linear thinking argument. If we're just studying examples of here are other times the committee did things that made no sense, then we can put that in that bucket. But as a direct comparison to USC, Ohio State in this situation, that's not really the same thing. But do you think the Wisconsin scenario here is closer to what this is, or not really?
I think it's comparable for sure. I think it's definitely comparable.
Okay, so I think the question is clearly. So the thing of a podcast is it's supposed to be interesting and it's supposed to be like the number one thing, really. It's not a science podcast. You're not here for information. You're here for entertainment, honestly. Is this entertaining? These people get in a room and they make ridiculous decisions. That's where we are with this thing. I really have questions about this sometimes because it's fun to talk about football. It's not as fun to talk about meetings. Okay, we'll try to get through this in a way. At least I did a Queen voice 4 times. That made it interesting. Wisconsin, they had real questions about Wisconsin based on their resume, but they felt like they had to put them in the top 4 because they were undefeated. That's a reluctant 12-0 in the top 4. And they loved Alabama, but Alabama had just lost, and they felt like they had to put them number 5 because they had just lost. Okay. I don't think, but also, so it's not equal going in. Wisconsin has 0, Alabama has 1, but then once Wisconsin earns the right to take that first loss, it opens the door for them to say, we don't want to put them in anyway. Like they really, even though they were 4, I think you could view how they still thought Wisconsin had to earn its way in because they hadn't beaten anybody. And they really felt like you've still got to earn it. But it was 0 versus 1. USC and Ohio State are 1 versus 1 right now. 1 loss versus 1 loss. So you absolutely have the ability to just evaluate them on who they are right now and put the team that you think is better in. I think you can have questions about USC, but I don't think it's the same way they had questions about Wisconsin back then. And also, Ohio State wasn't number 1 all year, wasn't this kind of like juggernaut that you were absolutely shocked, I think, by the Michigan loss in the same way that they clearly were shocked by the Alabama loss in 2017. There are some similarities there, but I think they're enough different that they didn't have to do it this way. But I guess I can see how it would open the door for what could happen if USC loses, that you put the team 4th reluctantly, but you're really saying we still need to see more from you. And if you lose, you're out. I just think don't put them 4 then, put them 5 and make them earn their way in, right? So at least make them climb up. Don't give them a thing you don't actually believe in and then say you have a chance to lose your way out. Maybe it's just semantics, but it's the same kind of thing of Wisconsin and USC in these situations. We still need to see more from you, but I just think they hurt their cause with the way they do the rankings in the next to last week.
Right. And that's the thing. Again, it goes back to, you put Auburn number 2 with 2 losses. You put Wisconsin number 4 with 0 losses. If you don't actually believe that these teams are 2 and 4, then you shouldn't put them at 2 and 4, right? Like you should be, and now don't get me wrong, that would make us mad in different ways if they put Wisconsin like 6 or 7 as an undefeated 12-0 team, but at least then it wouldn't be a shock when they completely threw that prior logic out the window. If you thought that Wisconsin was the number 4 team in the country heading into this, and then suddenly they're not, it just, what does that change, right? Like if you think that that Auburn was the number 2 team in the country and they lost a competitive SEC championship game, what changed, right? Like, and again, you can get into this situation where you say, well, they have a third loss, but they had 2 when you put them number 2. Like, how is that not evaluated the same sort of way, right? I think that's the frustration, is we just want consistency in logic, because again, to be in a situation where, like we're gonna, like what obviously could happen this week, to be in a situation where USC is a 1-loss team that ranks ahead of a 1-loss team that has no opportunity to better its resume and could fall out because of it, when like you said, they're not being treated like we just have to put them here because we feel like we're obligated to. That's a silly situation to me, because, I understand like the idea of, generally if you lose 1 game, you should be grouped with 1-loss teams. If you lose 2 games, you should be grouped with 2-loss teams. But if you lose 2 games in 13 games versus 2 games in 12 games, it's not quite the same thing either.
So let's get to the football then. And in this situation, do you think it is reasonable that there might be enough questions around USC, more questions around USC than there are around Ohio State? Like, would you say right now that it would make sense for the committee to be like, we have a good handle on who Ohio State is, and we think that's pretty good. We think that is the 5th best team in the country. We don't have as much of a handle on who USC is. So even though we have them 4 and 5 and we're like kind of making people question our logic, we honestly just need to see a little bit more for them. We need to see that. And you can say like, well, what if the playoffs started tomorrow? Who would you put in, USC or Ohio State? It doesn't start tomorrow. So maybe like we didn't think that way. And if honestly that's how it was, maybe we would have put Ohio State in ahead. Do you think with what USC's resume and the way they've played, is it reasonable to have enough questions about them that they should have to win their way in? Is that where USC should be? Or do you think, man, that's ridiculous? Why would there be more questions about USC than there are about Ohio State? They have similar questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely have similar questions. Now, I mean, again, look, Ohio State has played better against lesser opponents, but USC has played as well, if not better, against good opponents, right? I mean, their win over Notre Dame was a lot more dominant than what Ohio State did, right? That was a much more competitive game, and you look at USC, they were up by 18 points in the 4th quarter against, by the way, a Notre Dame team that's kind of figured itself out a little bit more than when they had played Ohio State, right? So you have a mutual opponent there, and the result, the result ended up being, I think, both 11 points, but if you watch those games, it wasn't the same result to me. And look, we can obviously have a conversation about, like, I also don't think that what happened against Michigan should invalidate Ohio State's whole season either, right? Like, it's 1 game against a team that's going to make the college football playoff. I think that the question becomes the strength that you give to everything else that they've done this season, right? The Notre Dame game was really competitive into the 4th quarter, where for USC it wasn't. That's a mutual opponent. The Maryland game, Maryland had the ball with a chance to go and win the game on the last drive, and a pick 6 meant that it was a double-digit win. The Northwestern game, right? Northwestern's one of the worst teams in the entire country, and Ohio State was in a game with them in the 4th quarter, right? So, like, I don't think that it's just that they lost to Michigan. I think there are cracks in the foundation all along the way that we expected to be erased by the Michigan game, and it didn't happen.
If you were putting a team in the playoff, if the season was over, who would you put in, USC or Ohio State?
USC. I think USC is the team that has earned their way in.
Okay. I do think I might put in Ohio State right now, but I would definitely put in USC if USC wins. And I guess that's where the committee might be. I would express that. I would express that by having Ohio State ahead of USC right now, which is what they don't have. So I do think in the end, do you have a problem? So here, let's finish the USC Ohio State part of it. Do you think for sure, given what the committee did and what the committee chairman said, do you think for sure that USC is now out with a loss and Ohio State is in, no matter what? Or do you think how the game looks, the type of loss, that kind of thing would matter?
I think they are very likely to be out if as a quote unquote 2-loss team if they were to lose this game.
Do you think there would there be a problem? Do you think the idea of like they lost to the same team twice, how can they be in the playoff? Is that a part of that argument? Does it hurt them or help them? Because if you think if they win, they're in. Everybody agrees if USC wins, it's in. So then the fact that they're playing the team they already lost to, or would they be better off playing Washington or Oregon or somebody like that and playing like another humdinger of a game? Or would it just be with what the committee has expressed, winning they're in, losing they're out?
Yeah, I don't think it should matter that much. I mean, look, there are teams that are sometimes just tough matchups, right? Like, and also if you watch that first game against Utah, like USC was the better team in that game. And I don't think that anybody should sit here concerned at the idea that Utah's a good football team, right? One thing to mention too, with these last two teams, with TCU and with USC, is that these are the two conferences right now that also don't play a divisional schedule, that play 1v2 conference championship games. So it's kind of also not a huge surprise that those are the two games that we're probably keeping a closer eye on, because they're not going to get Purdue sacrificed to them, right? Like they're going to play real football games. So, I think for me, it doesn't matter all that much that it would be Utah twice. I mean, Utah's just a good team, and sometimes you lose games against good teams. But I do think that the flip side, obviously, is if they're able to avenge their one loss, that would be, I think, undeniable, 100% undeniable.
Yeah. But a win, I think, but the win in the end would be undeniable either way. All right, let's do this real quick before we get to TCU. Who do you think will win? This is a Friday night game, so this is going to be like, we're going to get it right away. USC is favored by 3 against Utah. Again, Utah is 9-3 and 7-2 in the Pac-12. What do you think is going to happen?
So first I have to say, I mean, Utah's a great team, like a really, really good team. And we talked about it a little on the Apple show. But in some ways, they are the Pac-12's Michigan, right? They're the team that wants to beat you up. They're the team that wants to be physical with you. And so I do think that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. But when I look at these teams, when I look at this game, USC was able to move the ball pretty close to at will against a pretty good Utah defense. And I think that's going to keep up in this game. And look, if you're saying that this is going to turn into a shootout, I don't think that Utah can win multiple shootouts. I mean, I think that Kyle Whittingham admitted that the more this turns into a shootout, the less we like our chances. We don't want to play for overtime. We want to play to win the game. And that's why they went for the 2-point conversion. So I think that being in Las Vegas instead of in Salt Lake City, I think is pretty significant, right? I mean, that was a great home crowd as well. And in college football, home field advantage is a pretty big deal. And I also think that Caleb Williams is just playing at another level right now. So I'm going to lean USC. Lincoln Riley tends to be really good in conference championship game situations as well. He's never lost one of them, during his time as the Oklahoma coach. And I think it's going to keep up. And if I get Lincoln Riley a second chance at a defense, I think he's going to tear it apart.
Dalton Kincaid, the Utah tight end, 16 catches for 234 yards in the first game, which is how Utah stayed in the game. I would imagine USC will have a little better plan for that. Doesn't mean they're going to stop him, but the best player for Utah had the best game he's ever played to give Utah a chance to win on a 2-point conversion in the closing moments of the game. So that idea, it was kind of odd that it was like a USC game script, but a Utah win the first time around. And so, the thing is, Utah-Oregon, right? 2017, a couple weeks ago, Utah lost, but that's if they can play that kind of game, right? They did it to Oregon, a team that likes to score in the 40s. Doing it to Caleb Williams is different than doing it to Bo Nix. No offense to Bo Nix, but I do think it makes a lot of sense that I do think that might have been like the best Utah had, and USC is better now than they were then. But I think that Utah's good enough that if you're now an Ohio State fan sitting down to watch that game and saying, if we're rooting hard for Utah, if Utah wins, Ohio State's in, you got a chance. You're not rooting for Purdue against Michigan, right? This is a real opportunity. Okay, when we come back, we'll wrap this up. We got to talk about TCU. Man, I can't even imagine. Shehan, prepare yourself. We'll do it next on the College Football Survivor Show. The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. All right, we're back. We have to talk about TCU, and TCU, again, is in a very different situation. TCU is undefeated. TCU has the string of quality Big 12 wins that you would have when the Big 12 has many good teams at the top, nobody who's a world beater because they kind of all beat up on each other. But Shehan, this is a very different idea that for TCU has already beaten Kansas State, and it was at home. But the result is, congratulations, you now have to go beat that team again. And if you don't, you could fall out of the playoff for a team that's sitting at home. That to me seems like it will not happen. Do you think there's any chance of that if USC wins, but TCU loses, could Ohio State get in? Is that a scenario? Please don't go back in time and re-zombify yourself.
No. I mean, no. It's inconceivable to me, the idea that a number 3 TCU team could fall out because of Ohio State. That just wouldn't happen from what I remember from history. But to be serious, I think that TCU's clinched their spot. I think, you look at them right now, they rate very well in a lot of these metrics. They're number 1 in ESPN's strength of record metric because they've played a really, really tough schedule. Like basically every team in the Big 12 is a top 60 team right now. So to compare them even to USC's schedule, to compare them to Ohio State's schedule, right? Like people will kind of to pluck out the game against Michigan and and Penn State being 8 versus Kansas State 10, but like TCU every single week has played very difficult games and has managed to find a way to go 12-0. I think that I truly think that would be ridiculous to me if TCU was at any danger of falling out, right? And like you said, this is a team that they've already beaten. So they would still, regardless of this weekend, have beaten every single team on their schedule. They're an undefeated team versus the 1-loss team. I just think it should be over. I think it should be over. I think TCU should be able to be in the field. I think that they've been more impressive all season long, and I think that their quality of record stands up.
Zombie Shehan. You're shooting all over yourself. We need the wood. I know what Zombie Shehan would do. Do you think this group of 13 people have any chance of knocking TCU out of the playoff with the loss? Do you think that I agree with you, Zombie Shehan, for sure. But them, like the way they've talked, the way they've voted, the way they've viewed TCU, the things that they value based on your experience in the mock committee, do you think there's any chance, or do you think it's zero chance that TCU would fall out with a loss?
No, I think there's absolutely a chance. I don't think you can eliminate that possibility. I mean, I just don't think you can, right? Because one of the things in that committee room is that, I put together a big article on CBSSports.com. I think the thing that's going to help TCU is that they're going to have, when they pull up their schedule, there's going to be a lot of green because there's a lot of good teams on that schedule. And really, when you're kind of looking at it visually, it's more relevant to have top half teams than it is to have top 5 teams or whatever on your schedule. So I think that that's going to help them. But, the advanced metrics love Ohio State. And I think that, they can kind of pick and choose what they want to believe in a given moment, right? Like that's sort of the whole deal with the frustration of the committee, is that they can pick what they want to be subjective about and use whatever logic they want to kind of figure it out. So if you're talking about a 12-1 team versus an 11-1 team, but the 11-1 team, they only lost to the number 2 team in the country, and the 12-1 team lost their conference championship game, so they're non-conference champions. So we're comparing them, right against each other. I think that's absolutely a situation that we could find ourselves in. Now, I think that there's a much better chance that if they were to lose this game, that they would still stay ahead of Ohio State than when they won their last game and finished 11-1 last time. But no, I'm not eliminating the possibility. Absolutely not. I'm just not.
What do you think would happen? Would people go nuts? How many would there be a zombie revolution? What would happen to all the young Shehans and old Shehans around the world if that happened? USC wins on Friday night, and it's like, all right, that's it. Like, Ohio State's not going to make it. And then TCU loses. And let's say, like, again, I do think how games happen matter because we have proof of that in 14. And like, that's been said, that it's not just that Ohio State won, it's that they were emphatic. So say TCU loses not by 3 and not by 35, but they lose by 10 or 13 in a game that pretty clearly Kansas State beats them. Like, it's, if you watch that game and you said, who's better, Kansas State or TCU? You say Kansas State. they're the better team. TCU was in it, but Kansas State was a sound victory. Would that be bad for the sport, do you think? And again, you're going to solve it with the 12-team playoff, that you're not going to have this 4-5 battle anymore. But for the next, until we get to the 12-team playoff, how much of a zombie army would we be talking about?
No, I mean, I think it would be very bad for the sport, right? To be in a situation where the games kind of don't matter in some ways, right? Where what happens on the field isn't the most important thing, because again, like, this is a team that TCU has beaten already this season, and they're playing a really tough conference championship game. And by the way, what irony would it be that in 2014 they would get left out for not playing in a conference championship game, and in 2022 they get left out because they played in a conference championship game? And by the way, this is a frustration, right? Is that no matter what, the logic seems to go back to the same people. It's, well, you know, we can't take TCU seriously. They didn't play in this, or they did play in this and they lost. And that's the frustration, is that there's no set of consistent logic that seems to apply to different schools, right? Ohio State's playing by a different set of rules. Alabama's playing by a different set of rules. And it's really mostly those two programs. Clemson, like, a little bit, Georgia probably now. But, like, especially Alabama and Ohio State are playing by a completely different set of rules that doesn't seem to apply to anybody else. And I think that that's the frustration. I think that's the problem. And no, I mean, when I look at the 12-team playoff, that's why I feel like we need to be in this position. Because by the way, I do think that TCU could beat Ohio State on the field. I do, right? Because I think that that's sort of the logic. It's like, well, who would you take if they were to play against each other? Like, I'd take the team that's won all their games and not struggled against good teams this year, right? Like, the idea that Ohio State, well, but look at their advanced metrics, look at their great wide receiver. Well, yeah, I mean, look at TCU's NFL wide receiver, look at TCU's NFL running back, look at TCU's Heisman candidate, right? Like, these are actual players too, and they're not treated the same, right? So that's what it always comes back to, is that these teams are playing by a different set of rules if you're Ohio State or Alabama, or if you're anybody else.
The one thing we have not talked about, like 2016 Ohio State has gotten in before, sitting at home. 2016, though, they were 11-1. They were number 2 in the next to last rankings, and then they stayed at home and they finished 3rd. But they basically just got the Big Ten spot because Penn State, which had won against Ohio State head-to-head, which went to the Big Ten championship game and beat Wisconsin and won the Big Ten, that was a 2-loss Penn State team that did not get in. And they said, we're taking this other Big Ten team instead. So, but Ohio State was already in. They were 2, didn't do anything, dropped 1 spot and got in. And the other team, even by winning, couldn't win their way in. So it wasn't somebody falling out. So again, that circumstance of, how often have you had a team sitting at home, a non-champ sitting at home, not get in? That's the other one, but it doesn't really apply here. I almost felt like you were reanimated there, that maybe that's the story of this, that the first time TCU was left out, you were turned into a zombie. And then the second time TCU is left out, you're reanimated and everybody else turns into a zombie with this time. And then you become the leader as a reanimated full human of the zombie army that takes over college football. Did you see Wakanda Forever yet? Did you see Wakanda Forever?
I did. Yeah. So am I Namor?
You're like the guy with the wings on his feet. Fish guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Guy. Namor. Yeah.
Yeah. Flying fish guy. That's you. You're a flying fish guy. You're on the edge of being fly. You're still not yet. You're like in frozen animation in your zombie life. But just college football. You're a lovely person otherwise. I'm sure, your wife likes you and your family likes you, that kind of thing. I just mean for this. Okay. So do you think TCU might lose? Because the other part of this is that Kansas State's pretty good, right? Like this is not, it was in TCU before, at TCU before. Now it's not going to be a home game for TCU. It's a 2.5 point line. I don't know. This is like a very realistic thing. I think it's more about Kansas State and Utah than it is about USC and TCU maybe, but certainly I think Kansas State has a better chance to beat TCU than Utah does to beat USC, although both are possible.
Yeah, no, I think that Kansas State is absolutely a very good team. I think that they're the best opponent playing one of these potential playoff games by a pretty good margin. They're number 10 in the country right now because they have a couple losses, but I think that if you were to look at their quality, right, like they they are not a quote unquote 3-loss team. They are a really good team who's played a couple of close games, including the game against TCU, who's an undefeated team at this point. And so, and by the way, also has done it while dealing with a lot of quarterback injuries. They've been playing with their backup quarterback for most of the year. They had to go to their third string quarterback for stints against TCU as well. And they still managed to mostly demolish everybody that they've played, right? So they're a good team. They're just a flat out good team. And so I think that Kansas State absolutely has the ability to beat TCU. I think that, that was the one game this year, because TCU's played a lot of games. They played a lot of close games and kind of had some luck and kind of had some, close finishes and things like that. The Kansas State game was the one game that I walked away thinking, I think that the better team might have lost this game. Like that was the one game that I felt that. Now, I think TCU's also a better team right now. They're a little healthier right now. They're going to have Quentin Johnston back. They're going to have Kendre Miller fully healthy. And the other part of it too is that, in that game, they really lost control of the game once backup Will Howard came into the game, and they weren't prepared to defend a passing quarterback instead of Adrian Martinez. So it's going to be more game planned, I think, from TCU's perspective than it was last time. But I mean, Kansas State is really good. Like, Deuce Vaughn is one of the most underrated players in the entire country at running back. I think that you look at what Will Howard's done at quarterback, it's been very impressive. They do a great job of scheming guys open at receiver, especially Malik Knowles. And no, I mean, I absolutely think they have the ability to win this football game. Now, I'm going to lean TCU. I think that they're going to have learned. And I think that from a roster perspective, I think TCU is better. So I think that the second time probably leans towards which team has the better roster and can kind of deal with some of these matchups with, by the way, great coaches as well. But it's going to be a very competitive game. Easily for me, the game of the weekend. I'm going to be at that game. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to wear purple since both teams are purple, so it doesn't matter anyway.
Everybody looks good in purple. Everybody looks good. It's the best color.
Great color. It's my favorite color. And by the way, that speaking back to 2014 again, there were 3 teams in contention for the Big 12 championship back in 2014. There was Baylor, which was the school that I attended, TCU, and Kansas State. And I was like, I guess I shouldn't wear my purple stuff in the fall. I guess I should wait since both of them were purple teams. But, this week I get to go and go to a TCU game and wear purple because both teams are purple. So no big deal. And by the way, I don't know if you saw, did you see you sing the national anthem at the game?
I didn't.
So the new hip Big 12 is debuting this weekend. And so they are, Ashanti is singing the national anthem. The boxer Errol Spence is doing the coin toss. Some social media influencer that I really don't know a lot about named Rachel DeMitta is going to be doing the in-game hosting. So like we're here. It's the new hit Big 12, I guess.
Do they have Big 12 connections, or is the Big 12 just throwing money around and being like, let's get some famous people?
I think so. Errol Spence is from Dallas. That's the one thing. So he's like sort of a Dallas legend. I don't know if either of the others have any Big 12 connections.
I respect it though. If it's just throwing money around, then great, good for them.
Yeah, and actually the funniest thing is, and this is going to mean nothing to you, there's this streetwear brand called Bathing Ape, called Bape. And they do collabs all the time with like major brands and major artists and things like that. For some reason, apparently the Big 12 is going to have branded Bape apparel and like branded Big 12 branded Bape stuff at the game. So I don't even know what that means, but I'm excited to see what the hell that means.
Why would you say that would mean nothing to me? Why would you assume that I don't know what Bape is?
Do you?
No, I don't. Okay. So let's run through conference championship weekend from a 12-team playoff perspective. This also, like the way this has unfolded, is making me question conference championship weekend a little bit, because when we get to the world of 12-team playoff, the shorthand is, well, it'll be the 2 best teams from every Power 5 league, right? The one Group of 5 champ. And then one of the Power 5 conferences can get in a 3rd team, or that's Notre Dame, or it's, that's where that would work out. But it's basically, so shorthand, especially in a world where there's going to be divisionless stuff and your conference championship game is going to be the 2 best teams, just like it is with the Pac-12 and the Big 12 this year. I think your shorthand is almost Well, like both teams in the conference championship game are going to make it, and they're kind of playing for seeding. Unless they're going to start knocking the team who loses the conference championship game out of the playoff entirely and start putting in the third place team who's sitting at home not losing. And then that to me is like, that would be like if a team in the NFL made a wild card game and then you lose the wild card game and you're out, and then they bring in a team that didn't make the playoffs and like, oh, that team lost the wild card. You can be in the playoffs now. I think it's this, like, being reminded of this lack of logical linear thinking opens the door to that for me. And then all of a sudden it's like, all right, instead of a 12-team playoff where the conference championships are almost like a mini playoff for seeding, I guess, we're all of a sudden going to be in a world where people sitting at home might have a better chance. And then like, I don't like that. And then we're back to like, what are we doing? It's all just a Dr. Pepper weekend for people to make money off the TV show. But then they're saying the TV show can make you not make the thing that matters, right? I'm now all of a sudden more concerned about how the committee might handle that.
So let's turn the clock back to 2017. Let's turn the team back to Texas Christian University, playing in the Big 12 championship game, ranked number 11 in the country, right in line for a New Year's Six bowl trip. Because by the way, I believe the Sugar Bowl was a playoff game that year, so the Big 12's automatic tie-in did not apply. They come into conference championship weekend, ranked number 11 in the country. They lose conference championship weekend. They fall to number 15, fall out of the New Year's Six, and go to the Alamo Bowl instead. So congratulations. We already have it. And shocker, it involved TCU.
So you think it's going to happen too? Like, that's going to be bad. Like, why? They don't have they just say, we evaluate all the games, 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 without acknowledging that you are earning the right to play an extra game. It's not random. It's not that some teams have a 13-game schedule and some teams have a 12. This isn't a Notre Dame situation where there's like, well, you can't, some teams can go do this and some can't. It's you're earning the right to knock yourself out, which is just, they have not rectified that. They have not come to a cohesive, logical way of evaluating that. And I almost feel like they might have to get to the point where they put that in the protocols, because it might be the only way to get the 13 people to look at it the way you should be looked at. That a conference playing in a conference championship game can only enhance a team's playoff resume. It cannot damage a team's playoff resume. Just like they say in the thing, a conference championship, that crown matters. They have that written down, right? It's not just, they don't just leave it to chance of like, hey, we understand that like everybody in the room, like if you win your conference, that should matter. They wrote it down. I think maybe they should write down, you can't hurt yourself by playing an extra game that you earned the right to play. Couldn't they write that down? And then when somebody in the room was like, well, I don't know, they'd be like, it's in the rules, man. Shouldn't they do that?
I think that it would be good. I don't think that they do it because they don't want to open the possibility of that 12-0 Wisconsin team making it as one of the top seeds, because they want to be able to invalidate them. Now, the hope is obviously that they would go and look at that situation and say, we should just put them where we think they deserve to be from the beginning, so that we're not pulling a rope-a-dope there. But I think that they are not going to box themselves in, because they love having unlimited ability to edit the world as they see fit.
Man, I try to believe. I can feel it happening to me. I came into this podcast as a man. I briefly was royalty, and now I'm going to be a zombie by the end of this podcast. I want to believe in those 13 people, but they make it very difficult.
You've spent too much time at Disney World, Doug. You've spent too much time feeling the magic, and unfortunately, sometimes you have to take a step back.
I don't want to be dead inside. I want to be a human boy. Why are you making me do this? Okay, so it's a weird conference championship weekend. LSU is going to lose to Georgia, right? Do we have to say much about that?
No, we don't.
And Clemson, North Carolina, does anybody care at this point? Or
I think it'll be a lot of fun and also completely irrelevant.
Okay. Some might say about this podcast. Purdue, Michigan, obviously the Aiden O'Connell situation, the death of Aiden O'Connell's brother, just a tragic situation for him. Aiden O'Connell is just a guy who has been the absolute backbone of Purdue football for the last several years. A great story. Really, the consistently the last couple of years, the second best quarterback in the Big Ten. Jeff Brom and that program. This is great for them. This is new territory for them. All the best to Aiden O'Connell and that family, anticipating that Aiden O'Connell will play in this game. Tough spot. I do think that they are a more interesting matchup than Iowa was for Michigan a year ago when Michigan went and boat raced Iowa. I could see in a fast track, right? I can see Purdue with that passing attack, and they can run the ball too. I could see them putting up some points on this. It actually is. It's kind of like, it's a little bit of like, Ohio State light, and I'll be curious to see how if Purdue can put up some points on this. I think it has a chance to be an entertaining, if not particularly close game, whereas a year ago the Big Ten championship game was a snooze fest, other than Michigan establishing its dominance and putting a beatdown on.
Yeah, I hate a situation where a team decides we're going to try to beat Michigan by out-pushing them, and so I like the fact that Purdue won't try to do that, even though it probably won't work.
Yeah, so I do think, again, that I don't know. I have another show where I'm going to have to make picks. 16.5. I could see entertaining the idea of taking the 16.5 with Purdue, but we also have seen Michigan, when it gets about its business, Michigan has the ability to put 45 on somebody, as much as they are a team with a really good defense. And we saw what J.J. McCarthy did last week and all those kind of things. So that's the idea of Purdue trying to hang around and maybe doing so for a quarter and a half, and then Michigan in the second half. Michigan's been good in second halves, right? They the Penn State game was weird. Michigan was kind of dominating the Penn State game, but Penn State made a couple plays. It was close, and then Michigan rolled them in the second half. The Ohio State game is close, and then Michigan starts running the ball. Like, all that matters. So I do think in the end that could be a Michigan blowout in the second half, and that'll do it. I think we've covered what we need to cover. We will be back. The plan is to be back on Sunday after the announcement of the playoff. We'll let you guys know what we think of the pairings. We always appreciate you guys making the College Football Survivor Show part of your week. But for now, for Shehan Jeharaja, I'm Doug Maurice, and that was the College Football Survivor Show. The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.